They don't have a stake in this. I've actually seen some radicalized physicians, some radicalized, people with doctorates. Jordan Peterson, for example, who have just really gone off the deep end when it comes to this. And it's all because of like some supposed, moral obligation to keep somebody from harming themselves or something like that. Well, once again, when we're looking at the demographics here, we're talking specifically in the United States, it's something like 10% or less of all people in the United States are gay. And a fraction even of that 10% are trans. And a fraction of even that percent, not even a full percent of a 10%. We're talking menial numbers. So small, we should not even be talking about it. Have ever said and come forward and said that they went through some sort of a transition and then detransitioned and regretted it. But yet, how much propaganda is there right now talking about the quote-unquote horrific transition and the quote-unquote gender ideology thing? How's it going, everybody? I decided to do an opinion video since I haven't done one in a long time. In general, I think the reason I decided to take this on as like a mini task in my evening is that I'm very often concerned with the amount of propaganda that we're subjected to these days. Quite frankly, it's hard to even keep up with it all because so much happens every single day. I learned about 5 or 6 years ago to generally not devote extra time engaging with social media outside of my already established IPs. It's just a huge time sink to argue with people online, and I feel as though while I enjoy the active debate, there are far more effective ways to spread a good message or to debunk bad ones. That being said, about once a year or so, I decide to delve into the crevices of various internet groups to see how, generally things are. How's it going, guys? What you guys doing over here? Sometimes it's anti-vaxxers, sometimes it's flat earthers, sometimes it's evangelical young earth creationists. But this time I decided that rather than focusing on a fringe group, I would jump into a much larger pool, since people are getting all political again with the upcoming election in November in the United States. Yeah, you guessed it. Decided to talk with hardcore Republicans. Oh yeah. Decided, let's do it. Let's see what Republicans are doing these days. I already know the majority of their talking points. They haven't changed much since 2016. And, given that I regularly use Facebook and YouTube for my various projects, I decided to identify various threads of high engagement and comment something to get the conversation started. If you're searching for fish, it's a little bit more effective if you have good bait. So that brings me to the example I want to use for today. This one's in a page called The Trump Republicans. And I've just found that, this page can get pretty wacky. But they're going for their demographic, right? Like, they know what their demographic wants to see. And in this case, it says, of course, you're allowed to ask questions. Here's the list of approved questions. You're absolutely free to study and investigate for yourself. Here's the list of approved sources. And then lastly, we're not trying to stifle thought. We want you to learn everything you can as you reach the approved conclusions. So I think the reason that they are making memes like this is because, like, a lot of people can relate to, 1984 or whatever. People are worried about, like, being thought slaves, and they should be. You know, you got to be skeptical, but you also have to try to reach logical conclusions, not just, be a, anti-logic or just a naysayer. But anyway, so I know good and well that this post will attract multiple demographics. First inclination is there'd be plenty of anti-vaxxers, plenty of anti-maskers here. But, the thing that actually surprised me is that I found an anti-trans feller to make the strange comment for being someone, the quote here, for being someone claiming to be pro-science, I bet you believe there are more than two genders. And, you can already see what my introductory thing and, comment there was. Thanks for indicating you don't understand science or peer review. And then he comments this afterwards. And, I just decided this is a good tactic to kind of get an idea of who's on the playing field, right? So instead of engaging this person directly, I just decided to ask them to define gender for me, So that kind of starts the rest of the brief conversation that we're about to take a look at. But first, before I continue, I kind of want to just lay out my reasoning for even doing this, because there's a very common thing that I get saddled with here, is that I'm just, putting debate stuff out on the internet and trying to do a dunk on some random person or whatever. And, sure, I do have a flowery and sometimes, depending on how the person acts towards me, an insulting way of talking on the internet to people. But I don't really care about calling the person out by name. I don't want a mob of internet warriors to kick down the dude's door and try to get him fired from his practice. And that being said, I do think that this person has fallen into the same trap as lots and lots of people out there. And they're, currently bringing in, these, declarations, bringing in this person's declarations is valuable to the social context of the broader issue here. It's like the propaganda that we're being fed on a regular basis, and even smart people. This guy claims to be a physician. Even smart people get wrapped into this brain rot that is this anti-trans, etc. Like anything to do with anti-trans is brain rot. So, in other words, I could have completely left this alone and not included it in the video, and I feel confident that I could have explained the entire situation in a long drawn-out video essay, but that would be less relatable than me picking a real-world conversation that I've had with a person who has an opinion different than my own. Who better to explain bad opinions than people with bad opinions, right? So I've taken the liberty of hiding this person's name because the person who's sharing this opinion is irrelevant. The overall point that we're trying to make here is that, or that I'm trying to make here, is that there are a lot of really intricate details when it comes to these subjects. And often when I go to these, various different mediums, the thing I see people getting trapped in is not acknowledging these various different intricacies to the issue or to the subject. So they want to go with a easy conclusion or a simple conclusion rather than acknowledging the complexity of something that is more complex than simple. So I just want to go over and read through this and kind of just have a discussion around it real quick. So here we go as far as the screenshots go. So he says, sure thing. There are two of them, male and female. It is determined by your genetic makeup and not your feelings. So I replied, cool, thanks for also indicating that you don't understand science. Someone who's pro-science defers to the scientific consensus. Seeing that you had the opportunity to defer to the consensus and chose to parrot right-wing propaganda instead, I now know not to take you seriously on anything science related. Have a wonderful and prosperous day. And, the main thing that I was trying to do there is just try to tell him, hey, gender is not sex, okay? It's something completely different. What he is describing there, or they are describing there, is sex, a physiological thing. Gender's just a social construct. It's what we are categorizing people as, to make it easier to group people. That's just what humans do in general. So, like, for the longest time, we've had a heteronormative culture where people in general like to engage in sexual relations with people of the opposite sex. And additionally, people of each sex have traditionally thought of themselves as their sex in relation to their gender, which is just what they feel that they are. And I'm just saying, a lot of these, examples that we see online with the straw manning of like the oldest jokes in the book that are just bad jokes. They were always bad jokes, and they will continue to be bad jokes of I identify as XYZ or whatever. You're not engaging with the actual conversation here, okay? At a minimum. Regardless of whether, you come out of this video and you're saying that gender is or is not genetically related, regardless of whether it, has research to back that up, or doesn't have research to, then infer that it's not likely. I just want to say, you're just making fun of something and not engaging with it. And if you're not interested in engaging with it, what's the point in making the jokes and poking fun at? We are talking about a facet of our human condition that maybe you don't share, but still exists. So what should we continue doing? Making jokes about it, or having discussions about it? And I would much rather do the second one, of just discuss about it to try to understand what's going on there. It's a social thing that we are doing. It is not necessarily to do with DNA. And if we go over and look at this study, Neurobiology of Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation, the conclusion is inconclusive. They say they think that it might relate, but they are saying that there's more indicators saying that during some of the early stages of pregnancy, different hormones that the fetus is being subjected to and in what amounts may have something to do with it, which once again, that then would say it's not genetic. And once again, in the study, they say even that is not conclusive data. So what I'm discussing is literally just the social concept of me being born of the male sex and also identifying with male as my gender. It is possible within this social construct for me to be born as a male with male genitalia and not identify with the given, that I was given at birth. You can be something different. It is a concept. It's a social concept. And it doesn't have to be physiological. So, continuing on here. He says, bro, I'm a physician. I am way more educated on this than you will ever be. And thank you for also demonstrating you think that just because something is published makes it true. Heck, this study even seems to confirm to just two genders by comparing masculinity and femininity, which is a spectrum, by the way. So I don't know why he would be saying binary there when masculinity is a spectrum and femininity is on the same spectrum. So right there by itself, we already know that the guy does not know what the heck they're talking about. Plus, it also ignores twin studies about specifically mental problems. So this is another really dangerous issue. And I believe that it's been addressed in the DSM-5. But I think it was in the DSM-4 that, autogynephilia or, having issues or whatever with, your gender identity was seen as a disorder. And it was badly worded. It is not a disorder. Okay? It's not even relatable to bipolar, which is what this guy is talking about. Just read the literature and understand that it is the body dysmorphia that is the problem here, not the person. The person's fine. They are valid in identifying with whatever they identify with. It is the dysmorphia or the feeling of not being recognized with that gender identity that is the problem. And by trying to do these things, that makes that problem worse. So you are literally making the problem worse by doing the thing that you are currently doing, by trying to say that it's only binary, etc. It is disgusting. It needs to stop. You have no skin in the game. It is not affecting you in any way, but you know what you do? The things you do are negatively affecting real people in the world. And for what reason? Let's continue on. Did you know that bipolar disorder has a 1% prevalence in the population, but right about around 90% of heritability? Again, this is all hard-coded in DNA. So, once again, we're not talking about physiological things here. So, talking about DNA in regard to this is completely irrelevant. It makes no difference to what we're talking about. Then the last thing here, the scientific consensus is that all DNA is mediated, I'm going to say is probably what he meant there. Just because you identify as a cat, and here we go with the same old, tired, terrible joke. Just because you identify as a cat does not mean you can be treated by a veterinarian. If you identify as a car, you do not get treated by a mechanic. Hardy har har. So original there. The fact that you're still talking about DNA in reference to gender, a social construct, says plenty. If you're a physician, then acting as though you're an authority on this subject, which you have now demonstrated to not even know the basics of, should weigh on your ability to get a license. And I mean that. If you are in a service industry trying to take care of a person's well-being, do you think stuff like this is protecting a person's well-being? It's not. Go look it up. All of the relevant research points against what you're doing, and you should be ashamed of yourself. So then he replies, you know what else is a social construct? Time, species of animals, age, race, etc. But guess what? It's all rooted in DNA, which again is a man-made concept, but it exists in nature. The scientific method is a man-made construct. Liberals, which once again, who said that I was a liberal in this conversation? They assumed that. Is it possible that a person can identify with various different, beliefs of like a mainstream Republican and still, move to the consensus about gender science? Yes, absolutely. I know people that are mostly Republican. are Republican. Maybe they're not as far gone as like GOP Republican, but yeah, they're like, who cares, dude? Yeah, that makes sense. Whatever. But there's always these warriors out there just fighting for this imagined position. It's like, what are we even fighting for here? So he says, continuing, the scientific method is a man-made construct. Liberals really love to say man-made construct, to disprove something, but you have to have some kind of standard. Well, yeah, duh. Also, the argument from authority is another fallacy, but since you enjoy the use of it so much, I can easily turn the table on you and ask what gives you any authority to talk about science and biology. I address this in my final comment here. And of course, ad hominem, which he didn't even spell right. Attacking someone instead of addressing the topic at hand. Another thing liberals love to do when they know they are losing an argument. Which, once again, I ain't a liberal. Okay? Never said that I was. And I'm not. So I continued. I love philosophy even more than science. Seems as though I'm better at both of those subjects, Mr. Florida graduate. Says that he graduated from University of Florida. Red herring on the social construct word salad you just typed out. Nobody mentioned anything about DNA except you. Gender is, by definition, a social construct. So trying to equate that to DNA is so far outside the bounds of the subject that I'm surprised a person of philosophy or science would even consider mentioning it. You should be embarrassed with yourself for making such a wild and unsupported argument. That's akin to mentioning DNA in reference to wood frame houses. It kind of relates in terms of hardness, flexibility, what color the wood, but it's completely useless information when trying to figure out the pitch of a roof or what size nails you should use on the shingles. Continuing on. A society is a social structure, not a physiological system. That's rather hilarious that you claim that I'm the one using the argument from authority fallacy when you are the one that did that and even got it wrong. Being a physician does not make you an authority on gender science. The same as my engineering degree or expertise in electronics and software don't give me an authority either. Given that both of us are non-authorities, we should be deferring to the scientific consensus on the subject instead of claiming an authority. In comparing the two of us, I just shared a leading study in gender science, the consensus, and you, speaking to this guy, cherry-picked information out of it to fit your narrative. Then when I pointed out you have no idea what you're talking about because you're referencing DNA in regard to a social construct, you claim to be an authority on the subject. So please spare me on the argument of authority BS. It's silly and shameful for you to even try that. Lastly, what argument did I base upon an insult in our conversation? Speaking about the ad hominem attack that he's claiming that I did there. Where did I call you a name and then equate that name calling to be the basis of my argument? It didn't fucking happen. Alright? See, even calling him a silly clown here isn't ad hominem because I'm not saying because this dude is a total clown, his argument is disproven. So overall, and this is where I finish up, quit with the grandstanding. Been proven to have put your foot in your mouth by speaking upon multiple things you don't even know the basics of, and I will not let you get away with it. I will continue calling you out on it, etc. I don't need to beat a dead horse. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that this guy doesn't have really any stake in this. They don't have a stake in this. I've actually seen some radicalized physicians, some radicalized people with doctorates, Jordan Peterson, for example, who have just really gone off the deep end when it comes to this. And it's all because of like some supposed, moral obligation to keep somebody from harming themselves or something like that. Well, once again, when we're looking at the demographics here, we're talking specifically in the United States, it's something like 10% or less of all people in the United States are gay. And a fraction even of that 10% are trans. And a fraction of even that percent, not even a full percent of a 10%. We're talking menial numbers. So small, we should not even be talking about it. Have ever said and come forward and said that they went through some sort of a transition and then detransitioned and regretted it. But yet, how much propaganda is there right now talking about the quote-unquote horrific transition and the quote-unquote gender ideology thing, we'll just call it. Like your Matt Walsh's, your Jordan Petersons, Ben Shapiro, all of those kind of YouTube personalities. It's even mentioned on mainstream Fox News on a regular basis, Sky News, a lot of those, OAN, I think is the other one. They're just making this narrative to enrage people, to think that there's this supposed issue, when there's not. There's not an issue. They're making it up. It's a made-up issue. How many times have we tried to come back to this reoccurring supposed issue over and over again? But yet they continue with it. It's silly. It is silly that we're even addressing this instead of addressing larger issues. So I say to you Republicans, please just find something better to do with your time. Do you think this is helping our society? Do you think that this is inclusive and, is really truly helping anybody? Are you using the for the children argument? Well, children don't get gender reassignment surgery, so you can leave that argument out of here without the permission of their parents. So it's like, where are you going with this? Where do you think there's this big issue? Because it's not there. And you're making yourself look silly. History will not be kind to you if you continue with this. The legislation, etc. needs to stop. So maybe I over-embellished with my little last reply, but for a pro-Trump thread, it was pretty mild. Seen and been called way worse than a silly clown. I think the guy will get over it. But, I just want to ask, I want to pose a question. Why are self-proclaimed physicians so radicalized that they feel compelled to grandstand upon gender science incorrectly, I might add? I have my thoughts on the subject, but I think that's a subject for another video. So I'll leave you for this one. Stay skeptical, my friends, and as always, thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.